first post this week is Artificial Addition.
Both of these, the Artificial Addition and Truly Part of You that we're talking about, I think was the first time I heard of the sheep counter concept.
He wrote a short fic about it.
Was this before or might have. I think it was before. I don't know. I think I saw the fic first, actually. The idea of the sheep counter was one of the things from LessWrong that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And, these are the sequences that talk about it.
He starts with saying, imagine that human beings had evolved, rather than having learned, the ability to count sheep and add sheep. People using this built-in ability have no idea how it worked, the way Aristotle had no idea how his visual cortex supported his ability to see things. Which, first of all, is kind of a weird thing to try to imagine, but...
Like, I just took it as like, okay, imagine this impossible thing and move on.
Okay.
Some people can do math in their head.
I know, I mean, I can do some simple math in my head, but it's different than like...
But I know what I'm doing.
If I glance at that shelf over there, I have no idea how many books are on that shelf.
There's someone in the world that could glance at that out of the corner of their eye and count the number of books, but, like, those are rare.
But A, I can't imagine that. And B, when I do addition, I know what I'm doing. Like, it doesn't just come to me. Right? Like the same way that visual input does for my eyes.
Yeah.
What's fun about these two posts is that, like, you know, the whole sequence's endeavor was, like, let's get people thinking about AI and this whole project. This is, like... It's, I would say, thinly veiled analogy, but it's an explicit analogy. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, look, here's how people are, like, all right, I'm taking off, like, the dancing around it gloves. We're going to just look at the thing.
This is how people think about thinking.
Right.
I'm drawing a direct analogy.
Yeah, and you guys, you know, here's where the failure is happening, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so he says, in this world, because we're going with the direct AI analogy, pocket calculators work by storing a giant lookup table of arithmetical facts? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Arithmetical sounds right. Entered manually by a team of expert artificial arithmeticians for starting values that range between 0 and 100. While these calculators may be helpful in a pragmatic sense, many philosophers argue that they're only simulating addition rather than really adding.
That's where I start laughing.
Right.
Because now you know where the post is going.
Yes. But that would be right? That they're only simulating addition? Like if someone said, what is 3 plus 4, it would look up its lookup table?
Well, I started laughing because it's obviously like an article that's flipped at this point. Like, oh, what if, you know, math was something, that like humans just did naturally, and then we were trying to make calculate, like, because we live in a world where we don't, and where it's super easy to make computers run on math and calculate math. So... it is just the whole idea of, well, if, you know, GPT-3 is coherent, it's only, like, simulating being able to have a coherent thought.
Yeah.
And to me, that just sort of, like, already sort of showed some hypocrisy about the way we think about these things.
Mm-hmm. Because
what's the difference between, like, simulating being sentient and being sentient?
I think this post and the next one gets into that.
Yeah.
In this world, no one has ever developed an artificial general arithmetician.
AGA.
Yes. Although there are, of course, plenty of domain-specific narrow artificial arithmeticians that work on numbers between 20 and 30, and so on. And if you look at how slow progress has been on numbers in the range of 200, then it becomes clear that we're not going to get artificial general arithmetic anytime soon. The artificial arithmetic devices functioned as a tape recorder playing back knowledge generated from outside the system, using a process they couldn't capture internally. A human could tell the AA device that 21 plus 16 equals 37, and the AA devices could record the sentence and play it back, or even pattern match 21 plus 16 to output 37, but they couldn't generate such knowledge for themselves.
And it goes on in that vein, talking about basically like flipping a bunch of scripts about the way people talk about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, a lot of quotes along the lines of this isn't truly artificial intelligence. If you swap out the 13 for the 14, it's completely confused.
You'd have to simulate the whole human brain in order to get it to really do math.
Yeah, we won't have a
neuron by neuron.
Yeah, we won't have a real artificial general addition thing until we can upload a human brain and then have it do the addition for us.
It's emergent.
We have to build it from the bottom up.
Yeah, we have to evolve the computer.
We have to get one that can scan the entire internet for all the different things people say about math facts.
Yeah. And
My favorite example was, haven't you heard of John Searle's Chinese calculator experiment? Even if you had a huge set of rules that would let you add 21 and 16, just imagine translating all the words into Chinese, and you can see that there's no genuine addition going on.
And Eliezer said that this shows the danger of dancing around confusing gaps in your knowledge. When you say it's emergent, or when you say it's unknowable, in neither case are you acknowledging that there is a basic insight required which is possessible, but unpossessed by you. And referencing those comments we were just talking about, none are aimed at setting out on a quest for the missing insight which would make numbers no longer mysterious, to make 27 more than a black box. None of the commenters realized that the difficulties arose from ignorance or confusion of their own minds rather than inherent properties of arithmetic.
I liked the example of, you won't know the artificial arithmetic problem is unsolvable without its key. Like shooting blindfolded at a distant target, you can fire blind shot after blind shot, crying, "You can't prove to me that I won't hit the center!" But until you take off the blindfold, you're not even in the aiming game. You don't have enough information to strike at a small target in a vast answer space. Until you know your ideal will work, it won't. Mm-hmm. I thought that was that'd make a good T-shirt. I mean, there's some. I get the point he's making and the moral he's drawing from that, but like someone could argue, it's like, look, you can have a half-baked plan that works out, right?
No.
But that's not, I think, an actual counter-argument. That's like saying, no, it just
being
worked.
not in the aiming game. Like, maybe you can get lucky, but
yeah, the half of your plan you didn't have planned out just happened to work in your favor, right?
Maybe you have to take a lot of blind shots before you start to realize that there's a blindfold. That's the real problem.
That'd make another good T-shirt, or at least comment on,
adds to the analogy well.
It really does. No one, torturing that analogy is like aware that they're doing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But eventually you take enough shots and you're like, okay, I'm missing something, right?
Right.
Why am I not hitting this?
Yeah.
When the basic problem is your ignorance, clever strategies for bypassing your ignorance lead to shooting yourself in the foot.
Perhaps literally.
The sequences are so quotable. I'm surprised they don't have like a cafe press, so I could get that on a mug.
I mean, you can be the change you want to see in the world.
I don't have ownership of the sequences.
I think they're online for,
I guess,
public consumption.
I mean, I could make my own mug. I wouldn't want to make an Etsy shop or a cafe press, or does cafe press even still exist?
I'm not sure, but I meant you order a mug and you put this, order a custom mug and put this on there. I think selling these, you might be in, murky territory.
Yeah.
I bet if we did it on the Bayesian Conspiracy merch shop and then just kick back 10-15% to Eliezer for anything we sold, he'd be cool with it.
Probably.
I'm gonna do it.
Go for it. I think we sold 5 things
Right.
from our current thing. We might sell an additional 3 if we did this way, and Eliezer could enjoy the entire nickel that he gets from the 15% of the small fraction that we get out of it.
Yeah.
But then it would be available to people.
I really like the map graphic design that they had on the printed books, and that's now on the LessWrong website. I'd really like to have a mug that has that on it, actually. Anyway.
Alrighty, so that was
a sequence.
Yes, artificial addition. The second one.
I don't know if we want to spend another minute doing this. You can just say
Yeah,
no,
for it.
let's move on. I was thinking about that last line when I was reading it yesterday. When the basic problem is your ignorance, clever strategies for bypassing your ignorance lead to shooting yourself in the foot.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you can have clever strategies to circumvent your own gaps of knowledge, depending on how small of a scope your problem is.
Did he say
right?
can or can't?
I think you can.
You can bypass your ignorance.
And you can do
just
so successfully, reliably, with good techniques, but maybe not on important big problems.
Yeah,
I
guess
mean-
it depends on what your goal is. If there's a problem in your way and I don't know, if you're just trying to figure out how to forge a really good sword and you don't understand the chemistry, but you know that if I use these rules, then it will be brittle, versus if I use these ones, it'll be strong, then you can just sort of pass that knowledge down. But if you're just trying to make a good enough sword, maybe it's the best sword in your village, then you just do that. If you want to make the best sword that you could with materials nearby, you'd have to learn chemistry.
Yeah, since we had the
physics
Roots of Progress episode just a few weeks ago, which was fucking great. I think that's kind of a great analogy where before knowledge of modern chemistry, there wasn't, and metallurgy, they weren't even in the aiming game. They were just taking wild shots, and every now and then one would get them a better sword, and they're like, oh, okay, gonna keep doing this. and pass on that knowledge to a select few within their cabal, because you don't want competitors to learn this. But
Maybe I should have said like bow and arrow or something if we're gonna keep using the aiming metaphor.
yeah, but just randomly stumbling into things and then keeping those and just doing a lot of crazy experimentation is very different from like actually aiming at the thing you want, because you know how it works and how the parts interact.
I wonder if we can. I'll introduce another analogy and see if this is.
Pile them on, more analogies. We love them.
I watch all of the Great British Baking Show, and it's would be surprising, except it's not, the number of people that are like engineers or chemical engineers that are on the show. Because it turns out when
cooking is simple chemistry.
it is, but then you get a lot of people who are just hobby cooks who are also really, really good, but don't know the first thing about the chemistry of what they're doing, right? And so they're getting really far and really good through maybe it's two different ways of hitting the target. One is about knowing the chemistry, and one's about trial and error, and just like having the ability to infer from like the last 10 times I did something kind of like this, it worked out like this, so it'll work this time doing this new thing.
There's also lots of knowledge about cooking.
I was going to say, you got hundreds of generations of trial and error.
Just be standing on the shoulders of giant cake bakers or whatever.
Yeah. But I guess
I just started laughing when you said the Great British Baking Show, because I've just been like rewatching Bob's Burgers, and there was one where they were watching that, and the like littlest kid Louise is like, I can't believe that's how they picked the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think in that case there are different ways to hit the target, right? And one is through being a good cook, one is through understanding the nature of what it is that you're actually doing, like at the chemical level. And both could get you there, right?
The first one seems a lot like evolution, just random trial and error. And as we all know, evolution is very slow and doesn't always get you the results you want.
It doesn't have to be random trial and error, though. You can kind of know what you're aiming for.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, is that, I don't enhance my cake recipe by just like grabbing any random thing from the kitchen and throwing it into the batter, right? I'll be like, no, let's add a little more vanilla, a little less this, like things that I know should be in a cake. At least that narrows down the space considerably.
Well, then in that case, you're never going to invent the jalapeno cake.
Yeah.
Or like you have
thank goodness for that. But
your grandmother's cake recipe, and you just tweak it a little bit each time, or like you realize there's some happy accident, and then you just reproduce that. I mean, that is like a lot of how you got grandma's cake recipe, was that recipes would be passed down through families. Yeah. And so there was generations of people tinkering with and perfecting different recipes.
I don't think you would have gotten shepherd's pie if you didn't get the, well, this is what we have left over at the end of the season. Let's all mush it together.
That's creativity. Thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
And yeah, creativity also is part of it. Just like that creativity is the ability to be able to think of like, it's interesting because it's like, they're both part of the innovative process, but it's almost the inverse of the thing of just knowing all of the facts about the thing versus having a brain that can think outside of that formula where most people can't.
I think I heard creativity defined once as like something that is high in your preference order but low in your search order. Like you wouldn't have thought to look there, but it's the kind of thing that you would have wanted to find, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that sounds like a original Yudkowskyism, or at least one that I heard from him somewhere, but that stuck with me. Anyway, thanks for indulging me on the cooking thing. I don't want to keep us on this particular post too long, but that's what I was thinking of, because the reason I brought this up is because I haven't seen the last episode yet, so I don't know who is actually going to be the winner of this season. But when in semifinals, they sent home the guy who like started off at 95 out of 100 and maybe got to like 96 out of 100 over the last 7 weeks. Whereas other people started at like 60 and they got to like 95, right? So it's a much bigger jump, but it almost disadvantages this guy for being so kick-ass the whole time that he just had less room to grow.
So do they rate you based on how much you grow in a season?
They don't divulge their criteria.
You do learn best from mistakes.
But yeah, so there's some of that. They like to see people, who get better at things that they used to not be good at or something. Okay. But I feel like if you're perfect at everything, that shouldn't be a punishment. Right. But they don't have like an express criteria. That said, you also don't like win it. You win like a plate that says you won the Great British Baking Show. If it was like $1 million, then I'd want to know what by what criteria are you judging me that I didn't earn the $1 million. But it's just for fun, so I can dig it.
Okay.
Anyway, the guy that went home was an engineer who he's great. Watch this show, everybody. It's wholesome and fun.
I was just thinking about, before we end that, because we were just talking about mother of learning, and I think that that's a really good example to that whole series about. For people that don't know it, it's Ratfic, where there's a fantasy world where there's a kid who's in a time loop, and then there's some problems he has to solve by looping the same month over and over again and learning magic. And that like really demonstrates that in order to become a master, you need both the book learning and the real world experience. The like, trying stuff in real life, making mistakes, learning from them, learning from other people that have been there.
I do think there's some things that you can't.
I don't know how that would translate to AI. Yeah, because
also like if you want to create a nuclear reactor, there's no amount of random experimentation over generations of people that will get you. You might discover like radioactivity and be able to
Marie Curie.
Yeah,
and subsequently death by radioactivity or radiation poisoning.
Yeah. But actually creating a nuclear reactor, I think, requires a level of knowledge of the gears that you would have to take off the blindfold to get.
But you needed Marie Curie to die of radiation poisoning by tinkering around and figuring out what radioactivity is.
Yeah.
So I think, like, you still needed both there. I'm just thinking, like, I don't know what that would look like in AI, and it's kind of terrifying if you think about what it would look like. I mean, like, people...
Maybe the GPT-3s are like the Marie Curies.
Yeah, like, even... Yeah, GPT is, like, being watched by a lot of people, too, but I'm thinking of the even, like, weirder AIs that grad students are making, and just... I get a bunch of Japanese ones for art. Like, there's so many people making AIs to make anime waifus.
Are there actually more than one?
Oh my god, there's so many.
Okay, I figured once you had this waifu does not exist, how many more do you really need?
All of them. But
okay.
Yeah, I guess we're gonna, have a bunch of grad students tinkering with AIs up until one of them becomes sentient, if one hasn't already. And that's a little terrifying. But I, for one, welcome our anime waifu overlords. Just for the record.
Yes.
There are worse ways to go.
Never thought I'd end this way. But I always kind of hoped. All right. Truly Part of You is our next episode. Is our next
Sequence.
LessWrong post. Yes, sequence post. It starts out with, suppose a physicist tells you that light is waves, and you believe the physicist. Also, I'm skipping a little bit, suppose that instead the physicist told you light is made of tiny, curvy things. Would you notice any difference of anticipated experience? How can you realize that you shouldn't trust your seeming knowledge that light is waves? One test you could apply is asking, could I regenerate this knowledge if it were somehow deleted from my mind?
Notice that when I hear a physicist tells you light is waves, I've had this, I don't know, idea in my head, like heard it so many times, had it like explained by what it's interacting with, that my mental image is of a wave, a sine wave, and maybe it's colored yellow and there's a bunch of little ones but then when I saw light's made of little curvy things, I realized that like my brain generates an image of like a slinky, like a spiral. So already I only know that it's sine waves, and I'm like picturing one mentally because that was probably like a illustration I saw in a textbook or like a 3D model in a YouTube video. That's not representative of what light is either, but I know that one's more correct than the other. So
light isn't a slinky.
But yeah, that kind of helped me generate what maybe it would be like to be someone that's just heard light as waves for the first time, and you don't know what that means yet, and how you can have a sort of right idea or mental model, but totally wrong in a way that might matter if you were doing, I don't know, double slit experiments or something.
One of the ways that I kind of approach this, because this is the example brought up a lot through the sequences, is light being waves, whatever that means.
It's a particle and a wave.
Right. So like of course, yeah. I mean, so for me, like, I couldn't recreate that knowledge. I wouldn't even know what it would mean to get started looking at that project. And so I kind of put basically almost all of the things I quote unquote know into the category of like trivia. Okay. Like if this was on Jeopardy,
you could answer.
Light is made of what are waves, right?
Teacher questions.
Right. But I'm kind of fine with that, for that being most of my knowledge. Like,
because you're never going to use the knowledge about light maybe being waves or whatever in your life.
Yeah, like for some reason I have in my head that the Battle of Hastings was in 1066,
Well,
right? I don't know who fought in that war.
It was the French and the English.
Well,
I think
so
the
you know more than
reason-
I do. But the thing is, how could I
Well,
possibly go
loose
about
definitions of
how could I possibly go about verifying that for myself, right?
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Find some source documents.
I guess I could find source documents, but does that count as someone else putting it in my head again? Like that sounds like just finding a physics book that tells me, light is waves.
Well,
again.
you have to put stuff in your head by interacting with the real world. So I think like
But that world's gone. It's 1,000 years ago, right?
I feel so many historians cringing right now that I use the terms English and French.
Well, in any case, it's one of those things that like they can cringe more because I'm saying like that's not the same kind of knowledge that Eliezer's putting in a special privileged box of like things that you can understand and discover on your own, right?
I think it is. Because if you were, like he says, if you were to erase the knowledge of the Battle of Hastings from your brain completely, could you recreate it on your own?
theoretically you could, but only if you were looking for it. Which
Right.
I think that's why like when Stephen you said most of my knowledge is this kind of like trivia, and I think it's fine to be comfortable with that if you live in a society that has historians and like the field of science and the scientific method, because
And
like
the internet, so you can look up the trivia that you need when you need it.
that's why if I didn't know anything about physics and I heard like light is waves, I would know whether to trust that that's true or not.
You would know?
Well, like if it was a physicist who I knew was an actual researcher who was familiar with the scientific method, then
Yeah, but
like
you wouldn't know whether to trust the knowledge, you would know whether to trust the person.
yeah, I would trust the source.
Yeah, yeah.
Is what I'm saying. Like where if you imagine like being a hunter-gatherer tribe and someone says, "Oh, rain is caused when the gods are crying," you would be like, "I have no idea whether that's true," or like you can't verify any of your knowledge or very little of it. Like if someone told you you make fire by hitting flint together,
I remember in high
then
school.
you could test that, but you can't test whether the gods are crying.
Yeah. In high school, in AP Physics, our physics teacher walked us through re-deriving that E equals MC squared. And it took basically an entire semester. But when we got there at the end, and I was writing down the equation, I was like... I was like 2 steps before the last line, I was like, oh, holy shit, I know where this is going. We just proved it. Oh my god, this is awesome.
I feel like I did the same thing just as a nerd, like looking shit up in what became I was like Wikipedia. No, encyclopedias. The book ones. What Wikipedia used to be. And then yeah, I remember that same moment of like Einstein must have been like fucking running through the streets naked. Like
Yeah.
when he figured that out, because yeah, I remember like being really obsessed with that equation and writing it on like. Remember when you used to have to like cover books in school
yeah.
with like brown paper bags? Yeah,
But, like, could I re-derive it now? I mean...
I couldn't if I didn't have the foreknowledge, of giants.
Yeah, if I knew
Guiding
there
me
was an
along the way.
equation like that, I suppose I could start doing a lot of experiments and trying to find it again. And it would probably take me more than one semester if I wasn't being guided. But eventually, I think so, because it falls out of the equations and the observations if you give it enough time and make enough of them. But
I think with Stephen in the Battle of Hastings and you with E equals MC squared, like, you could regenerate that knowledge, but only if Stephen was a historian that was, like, specifically,
that's what you were dedicating yourself
narrowing the domain there. And if you were basically Einstein, like, if it were just me, I would never figure out either of those things.
Well, the fact that
first
knowing
principles.
that the fact that knowing that it's possible is a big deal. Like, if you also erased from my mind and erased from society the knowledge that this is out there to find, that would take an Einstein level of intellect to figure out. But if someone just like erases the actual the equation, but there's still the idea that I think energy and matter are related in some way that can be quantified,
And you're curious enough to do a bunch of experiments and
Yeah.
learn lots of math.
then it's a lot easier. Just knowing that it's possible is a huge first step.
Yeah, I think you guys make good points, and I was thinking about what I said about history not falling into like the domain of achievable knowledge, like in this special category, and I realized I think I was wrong there, because you can't like conduct an experiment the same way you can, I don't know, with this isn't E equals MC squared, but whatever, light bending around an eclipse or something, right? But you can say, well, I anticipate I will find something like this in this field if I go dig, right? And that is an actual experiment.
Like if you found ruins on a different planet somewhere, you would have the idea that you could figure out where they came from, how they got here. Whereas if you're a medieval peasant, you've been scratching at the dirt your whole life, and you see the ruins of the aqueducts, you're like, I don't know, man. Giants before were able to move stones like that? Who fucking knows?
Yeah.
You don't even have the idea that there was something there to research in some way. I mean, obviously there's something to research, but that there's some way of going about it.
I want to cut in a clip of a Rasputina song, which we don't have to do. But there's a song that's sung, I think, from the perspective of a American colonial little girl saying that we discovered the remains of giants from the Bible, and it's this very happy jig song, but the joke being that people found dinosaur skeletons.
Cool.
But because they only had a biblical education, they were like, the Bible talks about leviathans and behemoths. This must be proof.
Mm-hmm. Good old Bible. We got a little off track. Shall we jump back into it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for indulging my, I think because that's the premise of this whole thing. Can you regenerate this knowledge, that if it's deleted from your mind? I wanted to kind of hammer on that for a minute. So now I'm prepared to keep going.
Okay.
All right.
If you see a beaver chewing a log, then you know what this thing that chews through logs looks like, and you will be able to recognize it on future occasions, whether it's called a beaver or not. But if you acquire your beliefs about beavers by someone else telling you facts about beavers, you may not be able to recognize a beaver when you see one.
That cracks me up because I had a friend from New York City who I picked up, and she was coming to visit me, and there's these things called muskrats. I mean, New Jersey has beavers and muskrats, but muskrats, they're large aquatic rats. And there were a few of them just hanging out by the roadside, and my friend was like, "Oh my god, beavers! I can't believe there's real beavers, wow!" And I just didn't have the heart to tell her those are muskrats.
It's just a big rat.
Yeah, look at the beavers. It's cool, right?
That's I don't know. You should have said something, because
I think I did.
Okay,
but
there's a flawed idea of what beavers are, and that could become very embarrassing someday. But yeah, this point about the beavers thing and about regenerating knowledge is that if you don't have enough experience to regenerate beliefs when they are deleted, then do you have enough experience to connect that belief to anything at all? He quotes Wittgenstein saying, "A wheel that can be turned though nothing else moves with it is not part of the mechanism." And I guess that's what you said about trivia. It doesn't really connect to anything. It doesn't matter at all. So it's trivia. It's not a part of you.
Yeah, and so I guess what I'm getting at is that the only thing I'd take away, from my digression there, is that I'm okay with having plenty of my repository of facts be of that category, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's I don't care. This knowledge is not part of me, right? This is something that I believe, that I would bet on if someone asked me, right? But I'm not. It's not the kind of thing I care enough about to try to integrate,
I've picked up a few things about stacks and stack traces just from talking to you and being around you and Brian when you guys are talking. But if someone needed me to do anything with that knowledge, I'd be like, nope, I don't know, man. This is trivia in my head. I cannot entangle it with anything in the real world to make any sort of predictions or affect changes. Oh
yeah, I wanted to ask actually. In the beginning of the Truly Part of You essay, there's this notation with state of mind. Mm-hmm. I forget if we talked about that concept, but I was just curious, as the non-programmer, do you know what this notation is? Does this make sense to you?
He called it Lisp notation, which is an old programming language that I'm not familiar with. Okay. That might be how you would diagram out a function or something, but I'm just guessing. It does not look like the most succinct way to explain that concept to me, but
also sort of is the same idea that those, happiness and state of mind are not truly part of you if you were a computer that just had that statement installed. So there's just a bunch of illustrative examples. The next one was my sheep counter. Mm-hmm. A shepherd builds a counting system that works by throwing a pebble into a bucket whenever a sheep leaves the fold, and taking a pebble out whenever the sheep returns. If you, the apprentice, don't understand this system, if it's magic that works for no apparent reason, then you won't know what to do if you accidentally drop an extra pebble in the bucket. I broke the sheep counter! Mm-hmm. If 2 + 4 = 6 is a brute fact unto you, and then one of the elements changes to 5, how are you to know that 2 + 5 = 7 when you were simply told that 2 + 4 = 6? I guess that kind of, no, I'm glad I jumped back up to the notation. at the top, because that's just saying that, like, if you just have the statement 2 plus 4 equals 6, and you don't know that the TWO equals the integer 2, like, yeah, then, like, you don't have any knowledge about math.
Yeah. Yeah, if you don't understand what these things are and what they represent.
And then, I really like this. If you see a small plant that drops a seed whenever a bird passes it, it won't occur to you that you can use this plant to partially automate the sheep counter, which I just love the idea of, I'm imagining for some reason, like, this is medieval times, like, or, like, maybe, like, a fantasy world.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just, like...
Got this awesome biopunk tinkerer.
Yeah,
in
like,
medieval
I was just
Europe.
imagining, yeah, like, you know, like, thatched roof cottages and, like, twine and springs and wood, like, contraptions that...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, though you learned with this plant that drops seeds, though you learned something that the original maker would use to improve on their invention, you can't go back to the source and recreate it. When you contain the source of a new thought, that thought can change along with you as you acquire new knowledge and new skills. When you contain the source of a thought, it becomes truly a part of you and grows along with you. So it's very, very useful to be able to have those things actually understood and be a part of you rather than be trivia if you need to use those at all. Although I don't think any of us would necessarily run into a situation where it matters to us how light propagates and...
Actually, I took optics for artists as a class in college. I have an art bachelor's, lol. You need to understand how light works to be a good artist.
Do you need to understand it on the level of it is modeled as a mathematical wave function?
No, but, like, subsurface scattering is something that you need to know in order to draw, like, translucence.
Okay.
And then, like, there's a light source, you know, like light and shadow, and then there's also bounce light. So if you're drawing a portrait of a person, a novice artist would, or, like, I don't know, not a novice, intermediate artist would look at the face and draw the parts that are, you know, like, lit from the light source coming down from the ceiling, say. And then the shadows, okay, I understand that the light's coming from the ceiling, so the underneath of the nose, the chin, etc. are going to be shadowed. An expert artist would know that the light is also bouncing off the floor, or off the walls, so you have to draw not just the primary light source, but the bounce light, which can also be colored.
Cool.
So, all that is to say that, I don't know, going back to the analogy of the wheel, I liked that one a lot, but it, like, kind of got me thinking, if there's a mechanism where all the wheels are turning different things, and there's just one wheel sitting there spinning, yeah, it's not interacting with any of it. But I was thinking about more, like, thought as a network, where you have all the ideas that are connected to the way light works. Like, you know what a wave and a particle is, and then you can kind of imagine what something in the middle of that might be, and you know about the two-slit experiment, and you know about light bouncing or prismatics or whatever, and those all, like, form a model together that interacts with other things like drawing.
Oh, I mean, I agree with you for the most part, but, like, when you said you know what a wave and a particle is, and you can imagine something in between the middle of those, like...
That's actually, like, kind of where my knowledge is fuzzy.
Yeah, I'm worried...
you can't see it, so...
I'm worried about that kind of aspect of things because if you don't... It's okay to just have trivia, but if you're trying to use trivia that isn't truly a part of you, then you can run into things like Deepak Chopra.
Yeah.
Chopra stuff, where it's like, you know, quantum physics says that you can
relative,
affect
man.
things, at a distance without transferring information, and that means that anything is possible in psychic powers and the secret. Oh my god! And that comes from, like, having absorbed trivia and thinking the words mean the same thing they do in your imagination, and then trying to affect the world with trivia rather than affecting the world with knowledge that is truly part of you.
Deepak Chopra exists in a plane where there is no territory and there's just the map. But what I heard Jay saying about artists just confirmed to me that there were no good artists up until, like, what, 70 years ago?
There were lots of good
Michelangelo was pretty fucking good.
But you were saying that you have to understand that light is made of waves and the...
You don't have to understand that, but you...
I thought you said you did.
I'm saying that, like, the more knowledge you have about light, so, like...
I was just teasing. I meant, like...
No, it's kind of like
I meant to have
Michelangelo
fun
was
of,
just
like,
drawing things and observing the way light worked. I mean, also, he was a bit of a, like, inventor, tinkerer, but,
well, the thing is,
you
like...
can absorb enough of that knowledge, kind of the way that, like, the baker who just is experimenting in the kitchen, like, Michelangelo definitely understood subsurface scattering, but he doesn't understand why it works. Just that, like, when you're drawing translucence, you have to draw it like this.
Totally. That's what I was going to say is, and that's why I was being facetious about it. But one way that you would do that is I would draw the face as I thought I should, and then look at my picture and then look at the face that I'm drawing. I'm like, these don't look like each other. What am I missing? And then you keep going back and realizing, like, oh, there's a blue hue on the right cheek because that wall is blue. Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah. But you don't have to understand you don't have to understand anything about why that's the case, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it sure helps, but like I think you made a great. I think drawing it back to the cooking analogy is perfect because you can be a great baker/chef without having any understanding of chemistry, or you can be a great chemist and still suck in the kitchen, right?
Get understanding of chemistry, but you get it through your own tinkering. Like, you might not know, like, why baking soda and vinegar foam, but you know that it does.
I think that's more alchemy than chemistry then.
Yeah.
Chemistry to me implies knowing things about molecules and how they interact. Yeah.
Well, you do know how they, like, you could get good enough that you know how things interact, and you could anticipate an experience between, like, combining lemon juice and dairy. It's just, I think, like, the top-down versus the bottom-up knowledge. Anyway.
I can dig it. That's awesome.
Strive to make yourself the source of every thought worth thinking.
That sounds hard.
It does.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Some thoughts are worth having, even if you didn't make them up yourself.
If the thought originally came from outside, make sure it comes from inside as well. Continually ask yourself, how would I regenerate the thought if it were deleted?
Oh, I think we just answered that, like, the bottom-up.
When you have
I guess that would be bottom-up knowledge if you're baking or drawing by trial and error. When
you have an answer, imagine that knowledge being deleted as well. And when you find a fountain, see what else it can pour. And I have the same note that Steven is about to make, I think.
I think that I just made in passing. I saw that you just put that in here. Like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that is truly admirable. And when you really know this stuff, oh my God, you can do amazing things. You can, like, be the John Carmack of baking or the John Carmack of the physical world or whatever.
Knowledge transfers too, which is why I was thinking more about the network than, well, at first, like, the clock analogy with the one wheel spinning, and then a network where there's a node that nothing's attached to. But, when you start making a big web, it becomes easier to triangulate the missing information if you were to delete it, because there's a lot of things still attached to it. So when it was saying, like, how would I regenerate this if it was deleted? And then imagine that knowledge being deleted, and I'm just imagining you're, like, deleting nodes, so all the connections between them break. But then, like, you could still follow the ones that you still have, and, like, if you knew nothing about history, you'd be wandering around, like, picking up rocks and, like, what the hell is this? But if you knew that you were looking for, like, the Battle of Hastings is a thing that happened that, like, we need to figure out more information about because it was never recorded, and you'd, like, know where to go look and what kinds of, archaeological things to find and how to process them and how to get knowledge from that if you had all the rest of the nodes about history.
Well, there's all kinds of useful trivia that you can have in your life that you don't need to understand why it's the case. Like if you have a carbon monoxide detector or a radon pump or something, like you just need to know that if this thing starts beeping, I need to get out of the house.
Right.
I don't need to know what carbon monoxide is or how it interacts with my body to know that I shouldn't be in here.
I think it's better to know, like,
the more you know, the merrier. But as long as you know that bit of trivia, you won't die of carbon monoxide poisoning.
I think the suggestion that everybody should really strive to actually says that strive to make yourself the source of every thought. Well, maybe worth thinking is
I guess you got to put a lot of things into the not worth thinking then.
Yeah, well, like
is it worth thinking?
We don't have infinite time, at least that we know of. It'd be cool if we did, because this is exactly what I would do if I were immortal. Just learn everything, tinker with shit.
Even if you had infinite time, by the time you learned how the carbon monoxide detector works, maybe you've forgotten about why light behaves as a wave. I'm hoping
if I have infinite time, I also have infinite storage. Or not infinite storage, but, like, perfect recall.
Okay.
There's, like, some way to capture thoughts. But anyway, like, considering that we do have limited time and resources, I think maybe not striving to make yourself the source of every thought.
Yeah.
But the ones worth thinking,
I think this is a great ideal if you're a Superman, like, transhuman, mythical, godlike figure, but it's so much fucking work to truly make yourself the source of even a little bit of knowledge.
The fact that he threw in worth thinking, I think, like, Ineash, you're a writer, Steven, you're a programmer, like, thoughts about those things are probably more worth thinking. Like, whatever you're most interested in or what you're, like, depending on what your goals are, I think that that actually it's pretty worthwhile to try to like really explore the knowledge behind.
If it's like your craft,
Yeah.
if it's your profession, totally. I mean,
That's why people like talking shop. That's why people like
Yeah.
podcasts about what their interests are, because it makes that knowledge more a part of you. You can trace back the source, and you can, really,
Connecting a lot more nodes.
yeah, exactly. You can get a deeper Gears level feeling about these things. But you can't do that for everything.
Yeah, or like if you tried it with everything you run across. I think I actually like when I first got into LessWrong, I sort of like used to be really anxious about this. The fact that like I started noticing that there were all these gaps in my knowledge, and I felt like I need to like just be on Wikipedia constantly. I think I had anxiety about that as a kid too, or just liked encyclopedias. But like it's like, oh, okay, shit, how do bikes work? Like you like go to ride your bike to work, and then like you're like on Wikipedia. After a bit, it's like, oh, like you walk in, oh, how does carpet work? Wait, how does paint work? You get super overwhelmed. You do have to, focus on like what things are worth really drilling down into the nitty gritty, and then like what things can you just sort of like, when I'm an immortal, I'll figure out how paint works.
Well, I think feeling
Put that one on
anxiety
the back
about
burner.
not knowing everything segues very nicely into our main topic today.
Yeah.
it does so nicely that I can't use or I was going to bring up one more thing related to that, but
No, go ahead.
I guess I would wonder where you stop the terminating process of like, once you figure out where that thought came from, erase that too. Because like, eventually you just, I was thinking about this more in terms of like, ethics. How do you live a good life? How do you maximize your own happiness or whatever your goal is? If you become convinced about like the tenets of utilitarianism, or the conclusions, or I guess rather, I can give the analogy of the shallow pond, right? Steven Pinker's thing, Peter Singer's thing. That's one analogy, but if we'll throw that out. How else would you think about how you weigh like the cost of goods versus human lives? Well, suffering is bad. We'll throw that part out too. Like at that point, it just seems like you're throwing everything away.
I think you just start deleting enough that you
start crashing.
Age, like you just go down to being a baby eventually. Like, cause the idea of the network, and you delete the nodes, and then like the connections between them go away, is actually like neurons are a network like that. So
I guess that ultimately brings
be going all the way back to blank slate.
And that brings you back to the newly created AI, right? That wouldn't have anything at all in its network yet.
Well,
This is really valuable to think of in the terms of an AI for sure. I think that in terms of us,
the
like,
difference with an
I'm
AI,
fine just
though,
like saying, okay, no, I think I did some legwork and I've established these axioms for my moral framework. And yeah, they're up for revision if something else comes up, but for now I'm going to build on this edifice, right? Like the basic things, like suffering is bad, right? And what is suffering? I don't know. The thing that people say that they hate. Why is it wrong to do that? Because I've decided that it is, for the sake of just dodging the rest of this argument about what's right and wrong, right?
basically we as humans know everything we know from experimentation, and then other people's experimentation that they've recorded. Like, if you think of erasing, like, basically, like, stuff because your history has taught you it. So if you started just rewinding time, you'd go back to just being a baby which has, like, a bunch of hardware and software ready to go, but nothing installed on it yet. And the difference, I think, like, a human and an AI, they both would start as a baby with, like, the hardware and software, but, like, no knowledge. But with an AI, you can give it, like, the entire internet. You could have it read every book. Like, you can't pre-install a bunch of, or like, put a bunch of shit in a baby's head. It has to learn things by interacting with the world. An AI would as well, but you could preload it with tons of stuff.
I know Kung Fu.
Yeah. And babies come preloaded with a bunch of things too.
Yeah, it's not exactly true that they're blank slate, but that's why I was saying sort of the software and hardware. Like, mostly babies are little, like, learning machines.
Yeah, that's what their job is. I like the running time backwards analogy, because I was just thinking, yeah, that would be like if you knock out one piece of knowledge, but you still have all the supporting network. That's kind of like running time backwards, and you could refill in that piece of knowledge because of the supporting network around it. But if you kept that initial piece of knowledge and knocked out the supporting network around it, then you just have that one unsupported belief, and then it's like that single spinning wheel, or like a piece of trivia where it's not that useful anymore. It doesn't...
That reminds me of, like, losing belief. Because, like, if if I thought of like the edifice of my beliefs about religion, and then like the way that it deteriorated was exactly like that. If like pieces of it fell away, and then eventually there were just like spinning wheels left there that like if you scrutinize them, it's like, oh, this isn't connected to anything. Time to throw that one out.
Yeah.
That one out.
Yeah. Well, for next time, we are going to talk about the LessWrong posts, Not for the Sake of Happiness Alone, and Leaky Generalizations.